diversion. Every now and then, people look at this backward design model, doing objectives first, then designing your assessments, then designing all your instruction to flow into the assessments. And some people say, wait a minute, isn't that teaching to the test? And actually it is. Yes, you are going to design your tests first, and then you're going to design your instructional activities to flow right into, to feed those assessments. Now, people use teaching to the test as a negative term sometimes when they're talking about standardized tests that, like the SAT or the ACT or the GRE. Those tests come from outside the institution. They're external to what happens in your classroom. And some people will say that, yeah, if you've got your course and you've designed it and you've got your objectives, but some outside test is dictating what you're teaching, there might be a breakage, a schism between your objectives and the objectives the test is looking for. And so in situations like that where the test is external, you have to be careful about teaching to the test. But here in the backward design model, teaching to the test is not a problem. It's intended. It's a feature, not a bug. You are the one designing your objectives. And if you've designed all of your assessments to match those objectives, and then your instructional activities are flowing right from those assessments, then everything should be aligning perfectly, or at least really darn well. So teaching to the test is not a problem. It's really what you need to do to make sure that everything you do in the course is focused on those ultimate objectives. So yeah, backward design does lead to teaching to the test. But since it's your test that you designed with a clear focus on your own objectives, it's perfectly integral. It's perfectly good teaching. The very close alignment of objectives and assessments and instructional activities helps students learn better. This is why backward design is good for students. You have to think about how the brain works. Human brains work on predicting what's coming. We look for patterns, we look for repetition, and we anticipate what's happening, and we are able to think ahead and plan ahead. That makes learning work better. And so for students, when their learning can be tied to general objectives, that gives them some place to tie their knowledge, to organize it in their heads. If there are no objectives, if there's no plan, if they're just hearing one thing after another, day after day, the students are reduced to just rote memorization. They aren't given a scheme to help organize their knowledge. They just have a lot of disconnected sequential bits in their brain and they're trying to remember it all. When you make clear with your backward design process the objectives that motivate everything, and you show how the assessments flow from the objectives, and then you show how the instructional activities flow into those assessments, you make it easier for students to connect those bits of knowledge with overarching principles, with their goals. They can go, oh, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are going to help me do this, so I should file it here in my brain. Chapter 3 and chapter 4 are going to help me do these two objectives, so I should file those here in my brain. All of the backward design that you do will help students predict how this knowledge fits together, and it'll help them organize that knowledge in their brains, thus making learning work better in your classroom. Now, objectives are going to vary from discipline to discipline and from class to class. Even within your discipline, you're going to have different objectives in different courses. So I can't give you a template that says this is what your objectives should look like. But I can give you some general tips to make whatever objectives you come up with work better for your students. First of all, spell out your objectives. Spell them out to yourself in your design process. Keep them in the forefront of your attention. And then spell them out for students right away in your syllabus, right away in your lessons. Share those objectives with students so they can see the core of this organization scheme that you've come up with for your course. Let them take advantage of those objectives to organize their learning. Number 2, be aware. You're going to have overarching course objectives, and then along the way, you're going to want to plan sub-objectives or lesson objectives. For every step, whether it's a course or a unit or a lesson, you want to be clear on what your objectives are, what step you're trying to get students to take, what you're building on from last time, and where you're headed toward. Course objectives, lesson objectives. Big objectives, little objectives. And then third, check your objectives. Make sure they span the levels of thinking. You may have some basic objectives, basic knowledge objectives, where students need to learn and use certain field terminology, and that's absolutely necessary. But also look for opportunities to include some higher level thinking in your objectives. Look for opportunities to make students apply their knowledge, to create things with their knowledge, and then to use their knowledge to evaluate their learning, the field they're in, and the world around them. Spell out your objectives, use big objectives and then sub-objectives to support them, and span the levels of thinking with your objectives. Now, we have an entire module dedicated to assessment, and you'll see that later in your onboarding training. But for now, let me just give you some real basic tips on assessment. First of all, as you design your course, make sure you're doing enough assessment. You want to gather evidence that your students are learning. You need to gather that evidence on an ongoing basis. If you do just, one final exam, well, there's 15 weeks before that where you're not gathering any evidence. Holy cow, you need some assessments there too. So think about how often you need to check your students' progress and engage with them to see if they're actually learning. Have sufficient assessments. Number two, I mentioned a final exam. A final exam or some kind of long-term assessment is a good idea. You want to check week by week, but you also want to have an assessment that challenges students to pull all of their knowledge together in one overall package and to show that they can apply it all together toward the learning objectives that you've given. So keep an eye out for long-term projects that you can have students do to assess their overall learning. And third, when you're doing assessments, make sure you've got rubrics, whether it's a paper or a presentation or a lab report or a project, whatever your students are doing, before they do it, before you assign it, you should have on paper or on the computer a clear picture of what you're looking for, how many points it's worth, how you're going to evaluate progress towards your objectives. Having a clear rubric helps you be focused on what you're looking for and then to grade student work effectively. But having a rubric and sharing it with the students also helps them see what you're looking for. It reminds them of your objectives, it tells them what they should be looking for as a sign of their own learning, and it helps them perform better on the assignments you give them. There are countless forms of instruction that you can use in your classroom. But here are some basic tips you can use for designing any kind of instruction that you're going to incorporate into your class. First of all, whatever you do, design clear introductions that will set the stage for your students. Whenever you start a new unit or a new activity, first of all, tie into their prior knowledge. Find a way to reawaken maybe what they've already learned in your class in a previous chapter or in previous courses, or what they know from their own experience. Then, after you've reviewed things they already know and bring to the course, then preview the new things that they're going to get from this instructional activity. Give them a heads up, explain to them what you're going to do, and explain to them why they're doing it. This is the objectives. You remind them of the big objectives we're trying to achieve, or the sub-objectives we're trying to achieve with this particular lesson, or this particular activity or assignment, whatever it is. So, whatever your instructional activity, always do a clear introduction. Set the stage by reviewing knowledge, previewing what's coming, and tying it all to your objectives. And then number two, whatever your instructional activity is, think about and plan how you're going to create dialogue, how you're going to get students to interact with each other and with you. Dialogue is where the fun is. That's where learning really happens. It's the best part of teaching. The dialogue also then provides the platform for feedback. You want to design your course so you leave time to give students feedback. And feedback's essential, so students know whether or not they're learning, whether they're heading down the right path or not. But feedback, that dialogue is also essential to give you feedback. Dialogue with students is your opportunity to get feedback from the students who will tell you, hey, I didn't understand that reading, or this activity didn't make sense to me, or I'm still not clear on whatever it is. You will learn from the feedback you get from students to inform your design for future class meetings, for future semesters, whatever. So make sure you bake dialogue into your course design so students can get feedback from you and so you can get feedback from your students. So that is the backward design model for course design. We go in the opposite order of what happens in the classroom. Instead of going in and teaching and doing our tests and reaching our objectives, we go in reverse when we design. We plan our course by first deciding our big picture objectives, the things that we want students to know and to be able to do. Then we figure out what evidence we would look for, how we would measure whether students are making progress toward those objectives. And finally, in the design process, we design the activities that will help students learn, that will get them ready for the tests, that will move them toward those learning objectives. That's the backward design model. That's good course design because it will produce good student learning. Thanks for listening, everybody.